Colleagues, nice to meet you. It's really a great honor for me to join the discussion, the conference, the panel discussion of such great professionals, and to get, I think, international view on all the processes that we now observe in these unprecedented times. And as uh, as it was already said, I represent Ukraine here, and would like to discuss briefly some trends that we observe not only on our local market, but what we observe at the European on the European market, and the trends that I will present to you now. They are. We believe they are also applicable to many countries in Europe, because, as I said, we all together found ourselves in practically very similar situations throughout the whole world. As regards, I like very much the citation which New York journalist mentioned in March, at the beginning of pandemic and at the beginning of lockdowns throughout the whole world, that the changes that many of us predicted would happen over decades are really happened and taken place in the span of weeks. And this is so true that despite the fact that we have discussed many long-term trends, and they are still in place, but many of them have been accelerated so quickly that we found ourselves, managers, HR professionals, in a completely different situation, in a completely different world from the terms of HR practices, from the perspective of HR challenges that we and our colleagues, employees are facing now. Can you think for a second that as a result of COVID pandemic, practically almost 3 billion people on our planet have been affected by the lockdowns and stay-at-home measures. And definitely such situation is resulted in the fact that businesses and government leaders really have been challenged to both respond to this crisis quickly and to rethink their workforce strategies. And what is interesting is that they should rethink and reinvent these strategies just from scratch, just in real time, because nobody knows what to do. Nobody of us have ever been in such a situation, and I think it's becoming more interesting to learn from each other, to share experiences, and to find best solutions for our people, for our businesses, for our countries in the end. As I said, long-term and structural changes to economies, to business models, they were already in place, and they were changing that triangle, as we call it, the way the work is done, who does this job in terms of competencies, in terms of knowledge required, as well as where the work is being done. And for the past, I think, 3-4 years, we've been talking about the development of remote work, development of new techniques, but so with the COVID, we now observe really big forced digitalization of the businesses. We observe increased concerns from the employers and governments with respect to workers' health and safety, including mental health issues that have never been at so focus before, actually. And we also are concerned about ethical issues about employment, because definitely the world is now very much on the same situation, but at the same time the workforce is is in very difficult, very different conditions. Some people have lost their jobs, some people are still working, some people are working in different situations and different conditions, and definitely it increases some concerns with respect to compensation levels, with respect to the performance management measures, etc., etc. And definitely I think it's really interesting to know what actually employees, workers think about changes that are taking place in 2020. Deloitte has conducted in summer, after the first wave of COVID, Deloitte conducted a European-wide survey questioning more than 10,000 workers in 7 countries in Europe. And the results are really interesting with respect to what people think has changed in their lives, and what are their expectations, and what are their scares. And I think that this information might be helpful for all of us to understand how to plan our work further. I will also add some information about Ukrainian market and Ukrainian activities, because we as Deloitte, as a member of ACC in Ukraine, we together with the CC conducted several surveys on COVID practices made by businesses in our market. The first survey we launched, actually, the results of the first survey were launched at the first day of total lockdown in the country, and the third one has been presented on we spent 200 days of quarantine, and what are the results now. So there are some insights which I think might also be interesting for the community and for our discussion today. So what people think and what people observe, I mean, what workers think and employees think. Actually, interesting is that almost 80% of the respondents of that European survey reported that they have experienced at least one kind of change in their working lives. So in simple words, practically all of us have experienced changes either in working schedule, either in the way we work our tasks, either in leadership autonomy or responsibilities. So there are so many changes. These are really unprecedented situations, unprecedented changes. Interesting that almost 60% identified remote working as a change. Because yes, we talked about remote working, and we know that it's not an unusual thing. What is unusual is that 40% of respondents of our survey have never worked remotely before COVID-19. It means that like huge amount of workforce is now experiencing new ways of doing their work. Why they haven't working remotely before? Maybe businesses didn't have enough technology systems to support that way of working. The culture didn't support that way of working. There are a lot of reasons, despite the fact that we know that practices of flexible and remote schedules have already been in place. So in simple words, more than 100 million employees in Europe switched to remote working, with almost 45 million of them doing this for the first time. And definitely it creates such an unusual and challenging situation for HR professionals and for leaders, because they are now in a situation when they cannot give tasks, monitor performance in a way that they used to do that. And definitely this changes the whole landscape of, I think, HR systems and HR methods. Interesting is that 80% of the respondents said that adaptation to that new remote format and flexible working schedule was quite comfortable for them. So they learned to do that quite easy. Does it mean that there were no drawbacks? Of course not. And based on the results that we have from Ukraine, and here are the results of 86 CEOs of Ukrainian businesses, members of ACC in Ukraine. They said that they really faced very difficult and serious challenges in the area of human capital. These are responses of CEO. Emotional burnout of employees, difficulties in team communication, and uneven distribution of work within or between teams. So I think it's obvious that and interesting that for CEOs, such quite vague things like psychological climate and emotional conditions of their workforce now matters. Yeah. What is at the same time, what we also observe at the European level is that remote work is not changing only the format of the work is being done, but it also changes the ways how people communicate and how people communicate within teams and how they actually work with their subordinates or with their managers. It turned out that remote work is now resulted in greater autonomy. people received more autonomy. And what is interesting, it relates not only to people who are now working in a remote format, but also to the employees who are still visiting offices or are working in stores, I don't know, in many places who cannot work distantly. So autonomy and independent way of working is really interesting observation that we received based on the European study. We also try to identify what kind of instruments or factors helped employees to adapt to that new remote format of work or hybrid format of work, combining remote and office. What helped them to adapt? Interesting is that, yes, technology is very important, and without technology, at least 1/3 of businesses, according to some researchers, will not be able to continue their operations. So technology is really very much important. But when we asked people what helped them, there are very human factors that are really matter for them. Trust of leadership, to the trust of colleagues, and the network of colleagues that helped people to live through this quite unusual and challenging period of first lockdown that workforce faced. Yeah, I would also add here, time is another factor. The more time we spend on the quarantine or in lockdown, the more time we have to adapt. Yeah, it's also important factor for human beings, but interestingly, these human traits, these human factors are turned out to be more important than simply technology, which is definitely is very vital. Interesting is that workforce, which surveyed in our analysis, confessed that they think that for the majority of them, some aspects of their lives will change forever. They understand that they expect that we'll have more flexibility to decide how they will work and where they will work and how they will get the result that the employer needs. People also expect that digitalization and digital developments will also be more widespread and will bring more attention to cybersecurity issues. And interesting that one of 4 people expect that the skills that they need to perform their jobs will also be different. So people accept that the world that will never be as it was before. At least this is the majority of people think about the changes. And definitely it means that employers are now at the point when they shall realize that most probably such changing ways of working and such changes expectations of the workforce might change the way the employers are working with their human capital. For example, let's take performance evaluation. If a person is not in the office anymore, and if a person wants to work flexibly in a comfortable format, but giving the result that the employer needs, definitely it will impact performance evaluation process, because you most probably will need to evaluate not only the process and not only the presence and hours spent in the office, but rather the results which are provided by the individual. Leaders will need to learn to manage more autonomous and less workplace-centered workforce. I think you will agree that manager who is working with the team, observing team members each and every minute of the working time, and the manager who is working with a hybrid team or the team who is distant, remote, definitely should possess additional skills, some different skills which they need to develop. Yeah, and the employers should create environment in which such skills might be developed. And interesting is that we shall also accept that organizational culture and mindset of, first of all, leadership and employees in the companies might also evolve. Yeah, because again, transfer of social norms, transfer of social symbols, of culture symbols, of culture behaviors that are accepted in the company who is in the office versus the company who is now in a hybrid format, definitely might change, might be reshaped. So it's another factor that cannot be neglected. But what is interesting is that we always shall remember that our employees are not a monolithic block. They are not homogeneous. They are very much different. And our survey shows that, you know, we can say that there are generally three types of people, workers, in terms of their reactions and expectations, fears and hopes with respect to that new life, new reality in which we all found ourselves now. There are people who are really appreciate the changes. They really, they haven't lost their jobs. They received more autonomy. They received more independent decision making. They like the situation. They are scared a little bit about new skills and competencies that should be acquired, but they also realize that this is new reality and it will stay with them for a long time. There are also people who haven't been affected so much. Majorly, these are employees of big companies, very large companies, who are very much socially protected. They might represent technicians or administrative staff, and they haven't experienced a lot of changes, and they do not think that something really, really big will happen in terms of changes to their working life. And also, there is a third group of people who have lost their jobs or who have experienced really loss of income and feel insecure in terms of jobs because they worked for example, for customer services in restaurants, in hotels, in retail, and they faced very difficult times, and now they are a little bit more pessimistic than others that most probably their skills and capabilities will not be relevant in this new reality, and they need to learn, but they maybe lack with development of new competencies. So as you see, and these groups of people, they're actually less connected to the age. They are less connected to some obvious characteristics of the workforce. They are more connected to their personality type, to the composition of skills, to the employers the people are working for, to industries that they are working for. So we cannot say that there is one recipe for everybody. Yeah, we need to learn more and more about our workforce to identify what kind of strategies will work better for our employees. And in the end, summarizing the observations that we now have for the Ukrainian market or for the European market, and I think for global trends as well, I can say that there are several ideas that might be helpful for all of us based on the results of the study that I just presented. Is that first, definitely we all need to, as employees, being employees of the employers and employers being representing the employers, I think we shall rethink the role of the workplace. We should accept that most probably hybrid model will be very much widespread. Most probably we will not return to the offices like we had them in January 2020. And I think it's not, now is a momentum not to find a way how to get back to the past, but is rather just trying to look to find new ways of developing ourselves and our businesses in this new reality. We definitely shall accept that workforce is in the center of all our businesses. Will most probably need to develop capabilities, skills, competencies which are new. Yeah, people have already tried to be more autonomous, to be more independent, and employers should catch up this opportunity to keep this mindset, to develop further this agile mindset, and to support it with many practices in the businesses. And finally, let's do not neglect the issue of social capital, the issue of knowledge transmission, the issue of of learning, of experience sharing, the issue of culture transmission, actually, which now will most probably be different from what we used to have in the past, because now we are working in a different format. Even now, the conference which are having now, there are people who can see each other personally, and there are people who are very distant, but still we are all together, and we are trying to find new ways of cooperation and new ways of finding solutions, yeah, in such absolutely new format. So in short, I think we live in a really interesting time and unprecedented time, especially for HRs. I like the citation, I do not remember who says that if the crisis of 2008 was the time of CFOs, and the crisis of 2020 is the time for CHROs. And I think this conference and such a discussion is a sign that really human capital issues and people-related strategies are now of the most importance probably for business development and business survival in some cases. So thank you. Thank you.